We'll start with public comment. I have one speaker card.
Good evening. My name is Ralph Hoffman, and nearly 8 years ago, I moved and bought a condo about the same distance that these offices are from Pleasant Hill, Bart. I moved to downtown Walnut Creek, this close to Walnut Creek, Bart. And my condo complex now, there's buses, Route 1, which goes to Rossmore, Route 4, the free trolley, which goes to Broadway Plaza, Route 5, which is a free ride, also going to Creekside, Route 21 and 321, 7 days a week, going to Danville and San Ramon, and Route 301 also, which goes to Rossmore. And I'll be going home by taking Route 9 down North Main Street and then go on the Free 5. And then, I was I guess it was about 6 years ago, Randy got the idea of moving these offices down here too, so we're all close to Bart now. Thank you.
Okay, we move next to the approval of the summary of actions. Do I have a motion?
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Passes unanimously. Okay, take just a couple moments to check your entry in the attendance log. Note that there will be no meeting next month. The authority generally goes dark during the month of August. And especially the newer members, make sure we have everything correct in your roster entry. Any corrections, questions? Hey, before we go into major discussion items, we have a healthy agenda tonight, so we're probably going to have to keep it pretty tight on each of the city reviews.
Excuse me, Chair. Can we make a motion on the general business?
What?
Can we go back to general business? You need to make a motion on that one. It's an action. Are you done?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought they were just informational. Move the acceptance of the
General business items?
the rosters, log, and calendar. Have a motion?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Unanimously. All right, for our first major discussion item, welcome back David Current, who was on this committee forever and chaired it for a while, I guess in its very early days. He's going to give us a bit of the background on the whole checklist process and the reason behind it.
Yeah, okay. I'm glad to be here because I kind of expected to ease out of this. I decided that my term was up, and I thought I would be on the committee for a while until I found my replacement. But since my term was up, so I didn't get a chance to say goodbye to everybody. So I'm really glad to be here again. I'm very cognizant about your tight schedule. I took the time to write up, all my institutional memory so that people weren't here and could read it. So I'm going to really breeze through this relatively quickly. To start off, I'd like to take you back to the 1980s when Measure C, which was the measure that is the basis of the authority, was being founded. Since it was a tax measure, it required a 2/3 vote, which meant that you had to have a strong consensus of all the parties that were involved. So the Board of Supervisors, what they did was they convened, actually, which was the predecessor of the CAC, something called the Transportation Action, I don't forget what it was, TPAC. And this was made up of a lot of special interest groups like the Sierra Club, say Mount Diablo, the labor unions, Taxpayers Association, Trade Labor, like I think I did that. And they all had said, well, we would support this, but we're concerned. I mean, the Smart Growth Interest said, if we give you this tax money, you're going to just build freeways. We don't like that. The city said, well, it's not one nice thing to build new things, but we got road maintenance to take care of too. So we like to return to source money. And source got the tax advocates to saying, well, if you give money to cities and counties, all you're going to do is take the money you get from the authority and take the money you're spending on road maintenance and send it somewhere else. So there were all these concerns, and Measure C was crafted. If you ever saw the pamphlets, if you get in the election material, you probably saw that. I gave mine away to Anthony, so I don't have mine anymore, or else I would show you. But when you get the mailings in the election, you get these little pamphlets that nobody ever reads, but that has the text, and that's really the basis of the authority. So it had all of these. So what they came up with said is that, okay, we have to address all these concerns if we're going to get it passed. And what they did is formulated something called a growth management checklist, or growth management compliance checklist, which said that all cities need to comply with this checklist in order to get their return to source local road maintenance money. Okay, so the election happens, the authority takes over, and the authority is basically made up of council people from various cities who look at this checklist and say, hey, this is a lot of work. Why don't we just get our money? This upset TPAC a lot to say, wait a minute, we just put a lot of time, energy, and prestige into getting this measure passed, and you're just basically ignoring what we said. So TPAC at the time, which actually continued past the formation of the authority, or I should say Measure C, then said, we're going to review the checklist because we don't trust you. That you're basically going to rubber stamp everything. You're not going to be hard on your neighbors. But this was something that we really cared about. And this is why the CAC has to review the checklist, because the authority does not have a lot of desire to really knock their neighbor down. And you're kind of the conscience of the authority. So this is why you have to do that. So what is the checklist? The checklist is something that I think you've seen them. It's just a series of a bunch of questions that ask things like, I'll go through them. Yeah, I think you've seen them. I don't need to go through each. I mean, I don't have to. I'll go through them real quickly later. But the checklist is basically incorporating the concerns that TPAC had in formulating Measure C and later Measure J. Measure C originally was supposed to be an annual review of the checklist, and it actually had more things to look at, like they were looking at levels of service like police and fire and stuff like that, which when Measure J was passed in 2004, which was its successor of Measure C, kind of eliminated. Now, the checklist has gone to a biannual every 2-year checklist on the recommendation of CAC, because when we were looking at the checklist, and by the way, the CAC was formed in 1997. I forgot to mention that the TPAC was, because of the butting of heads between TPAC and the authority decided to disband TPAC, but they were obligated to have a Citizens Advisory Committee, and they decided to, based on the existing structure where you're kind of representing each cities and a couple large people, large groups. So when I first got on CAC, actually I made the recommendation that this is a lot of work. It is a lot of work to get these annual checklists. It's a lot of work to review them every year. And we looked at it and said, 3/4 of the cities aren't really changing year to year. It's just like about 4 or 5 cities that we really got to worry about. So we wanted to go to the authority, and we said, hey, why don't you just let those jurisdictions which are in compliance, where there's no question about in compliance, let's look at them at every other year. and just so we can concentrate on the ones that are giving us some problems. Well, the authority took that as like, well, let's just make it for everybody to be biannual, so that's why it's a biannual checklist now. You're right at the end of one cycle right now, too. This is why you got 5 people behind me that are trying to get theirs in, because this is the last month of the 2012-2013 cycle. And I should mention that I always wonder why cities procrastinate so late, because you got 18 months to do this. While you're doing that, your money's that the hundreds of thousands of dollars up to $1 million that you're getting from the authority is just sitting on the shelf, not doing anybody any good except paying for Matt and Diane's salary. Yeah. So, anyways, I'm just going to go through the checklist questions and let you know why these questions are being asked and what the CAC should be looking at. The first one is action plans. I think before I get to action plans, I think you need to understand what a regional transportation planning committee is. The way the authority is structured is that you have local regional groups, which are SWAT. So what are they? What do you got? You have 4 RTPCs, and you got Transpac, which is the central county, where we're at. You got Transplan, which is in eastern county, like Pittsburgh and Antioch and Brentwood and Oakley. SWAT, which is like in the San Ramon, Danville area, and WICTAC, which is the West County areas. These RTPCs are really where a lot of work's done. A lot of the work is done with the authority, because you're really getting the local viewpoints of what needs to be done. And part of that is, and one of the things the RTPC does is, if you wonder what the authority is, that they actually appoint 2 of their members to be on the board. So that's how the board is comprised, if you were wondering about that. But anyways, there are routes of regional significance, which are the main roads that, like Ignacio Valley Road, San Pablo Avenue, that actually that are actually move a lot of traffic and go through different cities. And why the authority is asking about the jurisdiction is following the action plans called by the regional transportation, the RTPCs, and the regional roads of regional significance, is that you don't want to have one city impede the traffic flow for people that are downstream, or upstream, I should say. So you're kind of looking to make sure that there's cooperations. There's action plans that are developed to try to improve the flow on these roads of regional significance, and that is why you're asking the question, and I hope you're kind of looking at one of these checklists as I'm talking here, is that you're really saying, is the jurisdiction cooperating? Are they, if they're making any changes like to their general plan or anything like that, are they making sure that they're letting their surrounding cities and their cities know about that? And well, that's generally it. They're just making sure that everybody knows what's going on. So in case there is some kind of objection that can be discussed in the RTPC to make sure that everybody's on board. Generally, this is not an issue, because the groups are pretty much committed to the regionals, the routes of regional significance. We'll go to number 2, which is the Transportation Mitigation Program, and that is that when Measure C was first passed, each city in the county were supposed to pass, what do they call those things? Fees to make sure that development was paying for its own way. And I think that's what it is here. So you're making sure that, and everybody had to pass a law, an ordinance saying that they're making sure that new development is paying its own way. This was done in the early 1990s. Nobody's ever backed off on that. Not a problem. So that's not a problem either. However, I shouldn't say there wasn't a problem, because a couple years ago, and people who are on this committee may remember it, we had problems with the city of Pittsburgh where there was a mitigation fee that the RTPC had established I'm not exactly sure what it was for, but the city of Pittsburgh felt it wasn't getting its fair share, so they refused to fund it. This caused a lot of conflict between the various cities in East County. They wanted to withhold the funds on Pittsburgh, and actually the CAC got somewhat involved with it, but really it was more on the authority level where, the other people that were in transplant were complaining. So that hardly comes up. The next one is the housing options and job opportunities. This is probably the one the CAC really has to watch. The idea between the housing options and job opportunities is that you want to have people being able to live to where they're working. Now, this has caused a lot of misinterpretations and problems because in some of the more affluent cities, they interpret any time that you're saying you want to have housing, workforce housing, they interpret that as affordable housing. They get all Donald Trump about it, saying, oh, this is just the riffraff. We don't want that. We don't want crime. We don't want this. We don't want that. And they've been very reluctant to provide, to really address this problem. But I think you have to understand that we're really not talking about gangs moving into the city. We're really talking about the teachers, the clerks, the firemen, the police being able to live in the community that they work in. You're also talking about the sons and the daughters who are living there and want to continue to live in the community. Or you're talking about seniors who want to remain in the community after they can't live in their house. But this is something that seems to get missed by the anti-housing people. Now, part of this is that the state also has a parallel concern about housing. I think you've all heard of ABAG. If you haven't, you should. ABAG is a council of governments that's designated by the state that has all of the Bay Area communities in it, and they actually set housing goals for every city. They say, hey, this is what is known as a regional housing needs allocation. Every city gets a arena allotment for affordable housing, moderate housing, and above moderate housing. And each city is supposed to develop a plan, which could be zoning, or it could be land use designation to make sure with higher density where they're going to have higher density housing to prove that they can actually accommodate this. And the state looks at this with the Department of Housing and Community Development, HCD, and every city has to get HCD compliance or else their general plan is not valid. So you have the state already looking into this. And the logical thing would be like, if the state is looking into this, why don't we just accept the state's analysis? For some reason unknown to me, the authority has hated HCD. That when we at in CAC would say, why don't we just look to see if they're HCD compliant? There was a big wall there. There's a big stone wall saying, no, we don't recognize HCD. We're going to have to analyze this ourselves. And we're not even allowed to ask the question about HCD, if they're an HCD compliant, although we do. And you also can find that on the internet. You can just go to the HCD website, and they have what cities are in compliant, which are not. So we have to look at it ourselves. But HCD compliance does not necessarily mean commitment. We have some cases like in Lafayette, and now I see in Moraga, where there have been development that has been approved that complies with the general plan, and all of a sudden the citizens can come up and say you can't build that. And the cities are kind of backtracking on this. That HCD, which is in the housing, the housing element, I should mention, is part of the general plan, is really what the implementation plan really is. But anyways, what you got is some backtracking here, and it's really up to the CAC to really say, hey, if you're backtracking on this development, are you still in compliance or not? Because compliance, the cities only have to go before HCD every either 4 or 8 years, depending on how efficient they are in getting their housing element in. So that's one of the things that you want to look at is when you're looking at the, are they in compliance with this third question? Now, it's been really a problem in the last couple of years forcing cities to comply with this, because with the Great Recession, there just wasn't any building being done at all. And then, of course, Jerry Brown decided to eliminate redevelopment agencies, which was the only mechanism that cities had to build housing. And that was taken away. So cities are now arguing that we can't build housing. You can't really hold us to numbers and expect us to meet them, because all we can do is create the framework and the environment for these things to get built. We cannot build it, which creates a real big problem. And so I don't really know. I think what the CAC has to do is really look to see whether they're making an earnest effort to make sure that housing is being built and they're not putting any roadblocks in doing that, like I had mentioned with Lafayette and Moraga. I think just recently I read about how there was some house development that was going to be built, and they had I think they backtracked on that a little bit too. So let's see what else I want to say in this. But anyways. So anyways, with the cities not being able to develop things, they have to depend on the developers. And I think affordable housing is going to be a real problem in the future, because people have to live somewhere. And with the taking away of the redevelopment agencies, there just is no – I just don't see how affordable housing is going to how we're going to have affordable housing. And I kind of see, people really crowding into one, like you may have one or two families moving into a single-family house, people living on the streets, and, of course, when people start, multiple families start living in a house that was supposed to have just one family, you got parking problems, and you got a whole bunch of issues. And this is going to be something I think the state's going to have to resolve. So, anyways, I'll move on to that. But I think that, this is where the committee really has to look at. The next question was about traffic impact studies, and that's just, again, a continuation of question one in a way, that you want to make sure that every jurisdiction, if they're building a development that has more than 100 net new peak hours per day, you just want to make sure that the surrounding communities know about that. And so you have to do the traffic impact studies and circulate them to your surrounding communities. So that there's just a question like, have you done that? Or do you have any large development, and have you circulated the impact studies to everybody around you? Okay, and number 5 is the participation in cooperative multiple jurisdictional planning. Again, this is the RTPCs. Are the jurisdictions committed to the RTPCs? Are they committed to the action plans that are developed? And also, are they? Well, thank you. And also, are they following the technical procedures that are set up by the authority to analyze traffic? Something the CAC doesn't care about. That's more of a staff level thing. Okay. And then the 6 questions, a 5-year capital improvement program. During the period it's being analyzed, did the jurisdiction have an active capital improvement program? They have to do this every 5 years anyways. And I think the main thing here is if there was any transportation issues in the CIP that they're shared with the authority. Again, not too big of a CAC issue. Transportation systems management. You just want to make sure that I think this is what he said. I always get this is just making sure that, again, an ordinance that was passed by the jurisdiction to promote carpools, van pools, and park and ride lots. Every city had to do this by the mid-1990s. They have all done it. You're not going to see anybody not in compliance with this unless they do something silly like decide to rescind that ordinance. Maintenance effort. This sounds like a great idea. The idea here was that, again, like I had said earlier, that if a city's going to be getting the money from the sales tax money from Measure C or Measure J, that they're just not going to displace that money, the money that they're already spending on road maintenance. They're just not going to say, oh, if we were spending $100,000, we're getting $100,000 from the authority. Let's just go continue to spend $100,000 in road maintenance and then spend $100,000 on police and fire. The Taxpayers Association didn't like that. So what the cities had to do was to prove that they were indeed kept on spending the money they were spending on road maintenance, and anything they got from Measure J was over and beyond that. So they were all assigned a maintenance of efforts number, which sounds like great. It sounds like a great idea, except the way the authority figured out the MOE was they looked at the 3 years prior to 1988 to see what the cities were spending, and that was the MOE, never adjusted for inflation. 30 years later, I can guarantee you every city is spending at least what they were spending in 1988. In fact, the city of Clayton has a big zero for their MOE because just prior to 1988, they had gone through a lot of reconstruction of roads, I think in the early 80s. So their roads were all brand new. They didn't have to spend a dime on it. So they got a goose sort of like a PR thing to make sure that people know that their tax money is actually, that their extra sales tax is actually doing them some good. The adoption of Measure J growth management element, that was just forcing the authority had to develop the model general plan, growth management element in their general plan, and the authority had asked every jurisdiction to include that in their general plan. They provided a model just to memorialize all the things that were in the growth management checklist. Okay, the adoption of a voter-approved urban limit line. This is something that's new with Measure J. That right after the Measure C was passed in 1908 for the authority, the smart growth people wanted to have an urban limit line to sort of make sure that the open space agricultural land was protected. So they they went to the voters and got approval of another Measure C, not to be confused with the Measure C of 1980, but the one of 1990, which established a county urban limit line. The problem with this was that it only applied to the county, that should a city annex land that was outside the urban limit line for the county, the city's general plan was now in effect. They didn't have to adhere to the urban limit line. Measure J just added a thing saying, no, every jurisdiction is going to have an urban limit line. You can either accept the county line or you can go before the voters and get your own urban limit line, but you're going to have an urban limit line. So, this question here is basically asked, have you developed an urban limit line? And it also asked because that urban limit line still wasn't complete, because we had a problem with a project called the New Farms Project that the county was implementing outside the urban limit line, where they were going to build high-end housing and then create these vineyards and olive orchards. And it was supposed to be like farmland, but it was really executive housing. And to do that, they had to change their general plan. They had to change their zoning and all that kind of stuff to do that. So we asked this question, like, are you changing any of the zoning laws or the land designations outside the urban limit line so that we can see if that's just a backdoor way of getting development in there? So that's why this question is asked. And that's about what the whole idea about the checklist. Like I said, I'm trying to rush through this because of I know we got a heavy agenda, but I think a question that you as CAC members should be asking is like, okay, how can I, this is a lot to do. How can I, do a better job of being a member, and how do I learn all this stuff? And I think the first thing you have to do is, I've got to go to my thing. I just got my stuff messed up here. I think you should, become familiar with general plans. I've talked about general plans here. They are the contract between the cities or the county with their citizens about what the city or county should look like, and you have land use designation, you have zoning codes, and if a development or any developer or owner of that property can adhere to all that, they don't need to go through any rigmarole or shouldn't have to go through any rigmarole to have development done. But I think that if you should become familiar with the general plans, not only of your jurisdiction, but of all the other cities. And, when you have a city's coming up here with a checklist, you should probably go to their website and check it out, see what they're trying to do, get familiar with the city. And and also before that, you might want to sit down with your own planning director and come, see what your general plan looks like. Talk to environmental and smart growth advocates. I'll read the local newspapers. The local reporters do a great job of reporting things. This is how I find out things like La Moraga or Lafayette, what's going on there. And I also saw in Richmond that have a rent control law, which I think would probably, if you want to ask about that, I'd be curious about that. But read the local newspapers. Talk to environmental and smart growth advocates. And, we used to invite, like Save Mount Diablo, they used to, every 10 years, they do sort of an assessment of the county. But I think before every cycle, you might want to just have these smart growth advocates coming in here, because that's their job to kind of find out where the weaknesses are in the county, where things are going on. And like I said, read the general plan of the jurisdiction submitting the checklist, and read the housing element, and you get a lot of ideas from there. Of course, you got to read the submitted checklist documentation. Of course, what you get in the handout mailed to you is just an abridged that the authority gets a lot more information, and you probably could go to the website and the authority website and really look at all this stuff if you want. You should also ask each jurisdiction representative to kind of give an overview of the city and if there's anything the CAC can do to help. Because sometimes the jurisdictions are having some problems, and sometimes having the CAC behind some kind of project they would like could help and assist them. Of course, and the other thing is to attend the authority meetings. I know Stephen does this all the time. The authority has a meeting. They have the planning committee meeting, and they have the full authority meeting every month. And there's also the RTPC meetings in your local community, because that's where a lot of stuff is discussed in the RTPCs. And if you can't go to the meetings, at least go to the website, read their minutes, find out what's going on. Something I did to learn a lot is I applied for the county civil grand jury. I did this back in 1990, and I got a great overview of what the county's all about. And I've been leveraging off of that for the last 20 years, 25 years, And also, as I mentioned earlier, prod your jurisdiction to get the checklist as soon as possible. I know, waiting until the 18th month just wastes money for everybody. And makes a long meeting. So that's generally what I had. Like I said, I kind of rushed through this. I don't know if there's any questions, any concerns, or, Yeah, Mark?
Dave, philosophically, I'm in agreement with everything you're saying, no question about it. But I think that, as with so many state mandates, HCP tends to create one-size-fits-all approaches that, honestly, in my opinion, don't really fit very well. I know you cited Lafayette and Moraga. I'm really kind of surprised that Renda got off the hook. But, just letting you know that, the degree of pushback that I have seen from the residents of not only Renda, but, knowing Lafayette and Moraga as well, it's really incredible. I don't want to call it, excessive NIMBYism. Well, it's partly that, but there are folks who just have become very accustomed to a certain lifestyle, and they are just incredibly reluctant to the point of hostility to allow, elected officials to even think about making significant changes which usually involve higher density housing. I mean, I'm not saying we don't need it, but I'm just saying you have to kind of, pardon the expression, walk a mile in our shoes to get a sense of really how incredibly strong the resistance to a lot of the housing element related topics exist in some of the admittedly more affluent, lower density communities. I just have to let you know that.
Yeah, and I think that I understand that, but when I first moved out to California in 1972, the population of the state was 15 million. The population of the Bay Area was about 3 million. It's now about 38 million for the state and about almost 8 million for the Bay Area. And everybody has to be involved with with providing the housing. And I think one of my pet peeves with Lafayette is the fact that it's near a BART station, and there's just so much opportunity for higher density housing. I mean, this is the thing in Lafayette. I think that was Louise Brown had this property, and I think she's still passed on. But she wanted to have high density housing there, which is close to BART, which makes a lot of sense because there are a lot of millennials that are living in San Francisco that can't afford to live in a city. And they would just love to live in a community like Lafayette or Orinda, where it's just close to, there's the downtown area of Orinda is a really nice place to be and nice to walk. I could just see that being a wonderful place, and it doesn't impact the people in Orinda or Lafayette that are living, away from the downtown area. They still have their rural community, but we get the housing, So I think it's. But I think a lot of the opposition is, I know that that's part of it, but I think a lot of it is, when I read the letters to the editor, it's all about affordable housing. A lot of it is. Yeah, I think there's one letter writer in the Times that just seems to be way out there. He just doesn't like any affordable housing at all. And if you read between the lines, it's because of who he thinks affordable housing is. So, yeah, I think that HCD, the state, I think they've been pretty accommodating, and the law has changed. It used to be that during the 1990s, jurisdictions could let slide getting HCD compliance. In fact, I kind of mentioned in my write-up about how there was self-certification if they didn't get compliance. But SB 375 has really changed that because the communities can be vulnerable to lawsuits. And every jurisdiction has HCD compliance. I went and checked it out yesterday. Everyone has. So they're meeting it, but there is backsliding going on. But Orinda, as far as Orinda goes, what really changed Orinda was the threat of lawsuits. That they had that Gateway project, which has changed its name many times, and it finally, I don't know, I think it's still getting built, but they got threatened by lawsuits, and they started getting affordable housing. And Orinda, one of the things I really like about Orinda is the second unit ordinance, where they passed it to where, they can accommodate, people living in second units. And there seems to be a lot of people who like that. And also senior housing. They built the senior housing. So Orinda, surprisingly, has really changed.
David.
Yeah.
Welcome. It's good to see you again.
Yes.
A couple of things that I just want to point out because, you're singing to the choir to me.
Mm-hmm.
And we were both on the same committee to review Measure C and Measure J. Just a few things that the authority, the commissioners are made up of mayors and supervisors of the county, correct?
City council members could be mayors, and there's, I think there's each of the RTPCs nominates 2 people to it, although I think there's 11. I think there's one extra one somehow, and then there's 2 supervisors. There are also ex officio people like from BART and other places. They don't get to vote, though.
Right, and so when you look at the makeup of the authority, these are people who are, most of them are politicians. In and of their own right. So I am not going to defer or vote against you receiving your funds because down the road I may need your help.
Exactly.
So you've got that little element, not so little going on. Sometimes it becomes difficult for our group to say we're not going to approve that, knowing that it's going to go forward and get approved regardless.
But you could at least make some noise.
Absolutely. We make noise and we bring it up to the authorities' attention. So,
and you may get the ear of the press, too,
Well, it all depends on how visible any one of us individually wants to be. So the other element on this is the affordable housing and I'm right with you. So when I look at and ask the different cities to tell me what their definition is of affordable housing, and I put the numbers together, some cities are a lot more detailed than others, but I get more or less affordable housing can run anywhere between $500,000 to $700,000 for a home. That doesn't sound like affordable housing to me. And then affordable housing, is that an apartment complex? And if it is, if you dig deeper, some of those apartment complexes are away from the mainstream of what the development, so sort of like not in my backyard type of thing. So it really, it comes down to that particular area and that particular city, what their value system is on affordable housing. And of course, you read in Lafayette where my rent is going to be increased. I can't afford to live here. And so it took people like that to make us look inwardly and say, I think she's making sense here.
Yeah.
So if we can do that, maybe every time we have a checklist, or somebody comes in for the checklist compliance, I think we've done a good job just to have that particular representative go back to their particular group and say, we might want to look to see, once again, what does affordable mean, although I know that it's based on a particular calculation.
Well, it's actually the same, it actually looks at the county as a
So there isn't an opportunity for discussion, but I'd like to place it on the next agenda.
All right,
We'll
put together
August.
something to do this discussion.
Thank you.
I think it would very much take authority action for anything like this to be placed into effect.
Yeah, I don't want to, not that we rushed through any of the compliance checklists. I don't think we did. But I think that at some point there may be some cities who provide their checklists to us, and we may have some very in-depth questions. And staying here till midnight is not my idea of providing service to my city. So,
Chair Smith, just wanted to say that at the end of every checklist cycle, we do open up the guidelines for revision and update, and that will be happening starting in September with approval by December for the next cycle of fiscal year cycle of checklists. So that will be a good opportunity to, if any changes are to be made, would be in the September to December timeframe.
Okay, we'll certainly include that in preparation of the agenda. Thank you.
May I say something about that?
In deference to a former member,
Yes.
even though I don't have a speaker card.
Oh, that's okay. Well, actually, you do have. Yes, Yolanda, that certainly is a concern. That's always been a concern of mine, and I've never understood why cities wait so long. Because you're talking, maybe it's because of the low interest rates, but you're talking about. I think Pinole has the lease of about $300,000 that they get from the authority, and I think Richmond gets about $1 million. I think it was. That's a lot of money, and I think it's really behooves each member here to kind of force their city to get it in as quickly as possible so that they can get that money. And I say that knowing that Pinole was one of the last ones to do it. I, kind of told Winston he should get it in, so I've not been successful. But a carrot that you can offer to, especially the latecomers here, is that the way the money's distributed is, for 2012, 2013, it's in 2 installments. It's the day that they get it in, they get their first installment, and a year later they get their second installment. So that means that all these cities that waited until now to do it, if they get on their horse next April, when you can start submitting checklists until next June, if they were able to get the 2014, 2015 checklist in before the end of next June, they not only get the second installment of the 2012, 2013 money, but they get the first installment of 2014, 2015, which could make them heroes to their city council, who all of a sudden get this either $300,000 or $100 million that they get to use in their 2016 budget. So the key here is that I'm not sure how successful you are going to be to convince the authority to, to change the rules. As I said in my presentation, they're city people. They're gonna be resistant to anything that's not gonna help their city. Their cities are neighbors. But ride your city planners. Get in there and say, hey, get that money. Don't let that, or go to your city council. Go in there and, in the speaker's cards and say, how come we don't have the checklist in now? That's $300,000, it's $400,000, it's $500,000, depending what city you are, that we could be spending now. So I think the pressure you have is yourself.
Even more, city managers.
Yeah.
City managers are the ones that really.
But as long as I'm up here, I was kind of thinking some other things, agenda items that you might want to consider since there's a lot of new people here. The I-80 ICM update, that's pretty close to implementation. Might be a good agenda item to bring that in. Affordable housing, find out about, as I mentioned, affordable housing is going to be a real issue. And obviously the CAC is not going to resolve that problem. It's going to be a real statewide problem. But you might want to get maybe some state representative, somebody that represents a state representative, one of the state representatives come in here and talk about what the state's ideas are on affordable housing. And since you're going to go through the new cycle of checklists in April, I think it might be good around March or February. I mentioned about getting groups like Mount Diablo in here because they will kind of like point to you what the issues are around the county, and it might help you looking at the next cycle. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other suggestions? Okay, we'll get to work on that. So no more suggestions for future adjournment items? If not, I would like to request the committee for a moment of silence and adjournment in memory of Sergeant Scott Munger of the Hayward Police Department, filling the line of duties. He's a resident of Brentwood. Meeting is adjourned, and thank you.